Hello and welcome to the Practical Animal channel. The channel is for you if you want to know what it takes to work with animals, either directly or indirectly, with domestic animals or with wild animals, if with wildlife, with free living animals or animals in captivity. Whatever the sector is, we aim to cover it all. And most weeks we conduct an interview with an animal industry professional who provides insight into the skills and personal qualities needed to do what he or she does. My guest this week is Dr. Roy Armstrong. Roy is a biological consultant to industry. He is an expert ornithologist, ecologist, and he also runs a wildlife conservation and ecotourism project in the Gambia in West Africa. Dr. Roy Armstrong, welcome to the Practical Animal channel.
Thank you for inviting me, John.
Roy, first of all, please can you describe how your career developed?
Yes, certainly. It's kind of been inevitable because I've always been a sort of a bird nerd. Even from the early days of sort of walking home from primary school, we had neighbours phoning my mother to say, if you're worried about where your Roy is, he's watching the jackdaws on our chimney pots. Yes, from very early days, I've been very, not driven, but I've just been fascinated by the whole world of birds and other wildlife. And of course, the reason most people become bird people is that just because they're the most obvious wildlife if you're living in the United Kingdom. But as you've had opportunities to work on other things, it's basically all animals and even some plants sometimes.
Roy, you are a biological consultant. You carry out research. You're an ornithologist to big industry, and you have this very interesting conservation and ecotourism project in the Gambia in West Africa. Roy, what skills and personal qualities does it take to run both a biological consultancy and an overseas conservation project?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends very much on what sector you're in. So the skills for ecotourism, obviously you need to be able to entertain and find wildlife and so on. And the skills for consultancy can be very different. In consultancy, it depends whether or not you're looking to get a job to work with a big company doing work for them, or whether or not you want to be like fly solo and pursue your own projects. We've done both within our business. We used to have a lot of staff and so on, but I've actually pared down. I got more involved with university teaching and writing the zoology degree for our local university. So I've seen it from all sides. I would say that the one shining thing that you definitely need is skill. Arm yourself, get out there and learn. If you can get a few species that are likely to be of commercial interest, that's the way to get yourself employed or to get yourself the contract work. So for example, if you're thinking of the United Kingdom at the moment, the money is in bats. There's always people looking for bat surveyors, great crested newts, vegetation surveys. They're the habitat that animals live in anyway, so whatever. But funnily enough, in the 18 years that I taught at university, my advice on what to study actually changed. Because when I started, bird watchers were 10 a penny in terms of like professional ones. And it was a very competitive sector. But over these years, it's actually come to the point where we don't get many skilled bird people coming through. So we really need, I would now encourage people to pursue that direction. In terms of other skills, and I can come back to actually explain how to develop your bird skills as well, if you like, at the end of this bit. But the thing to remember, if you're working commercially with people who you want to employ you and give you work, bear in mind that most of them, it's not their money they're spending. So the main thing that you need to do is to make their life as easy as possible. So don't be phoning them all the time. Be ahead of the game. Make sure that you think about why do they want this? Who do they have to sort of pass it on to, and what information they need, and in what format. So it's really very much a business thing of being in customer care and making sure that the clients, you're giving them exactly what they need, not what you think they should have, what makes their life easier. And don't be late with reports. Don't put them under any stress, because there's plenty of other people out there that they can employ. But if you can develop that relationship where they trust you, I'll give you an example. I've got one of my clients who I've been working for more than 15 years now. You're used to, when I worked at the university, you have to go almost cap in hand to people to say, can I have this £500 to do this? And then there's several layers of paperwork. At this international airport, at one point I said, look, we're going to need an extra survey. Is it all right if I go ahead? It will cost X amount. And they just went, you're the consultant. If you think that needs doing, do it and invoice us. And that's where if you can get to there with your clients, that you've got total trust, and that they know that they're going to get what they need from you and you're supporting them. That's the way to forge long-term employment opportunities. In terms of it is difficult to get into this industry. Nobody should pretend otherwise. And there are lots of degrees and courses and so on offering the skills to become a professional zoologist or ecologist. But there will be dark times. There's times when the contracts won't come in. There'll be times when you have to do other stuff to make a living and so on. So you have to be self-driven. You will have to maintain that focus and that dream. But all the time that you're doing that, develop your skills. They are the thing that people need. If you're starting out, just to have a little bit on birds, the best way, if you think of your best friends, when you see them coming down the street, you don't say, oh, hair medium brown, 3.5 inches long with black tank top and whatever, and that must be Bob. That's not how it works, is it? You know them. When you see them, your brain has already analysed the information, you know them. And you can do that with birds. So don't get too hung up with reading the field guide and going, oh, white supercilium with brown tertials and all this complicated language. Get to know them. And that's very straightforward, because if you actually go out locally, for a start off, don't scare yourself by buying one of these guides to the 500 birds of species of Europe and North Africa, because you don't know where to start then. Try and find out what lives in your area. There will be little bird reports online about somebody went for a walk in your area and this is what they saw. From that, you can narrow it down. Or you can look in a bird book and actually look at what the distribution maps are and actually get yourself into the right, these are the ones that occur here. Because you don't need to tell a European cuckoo from an Oriental cuckoo most of the time. They're both on the same plate in a field guide, but one probably hasn't been recorded within 2,000 miles of where you live. So you can actually pare it down to a list of what you know. Then, if you learn the commonest 20, 30 species, and let's face it, you know some of them already. Everybody knows what a robin is. Everyone knows a male blackbird. Once you do that, once you can identify, say, 30 species, you'll probably be able to identify 95% of what you see. Because when you look around, it's like, right, that's a sparrow, that's a blackbird, that's a whatever. And then it becomes interesting, because then you see something that's different. Oh, I like that. Now then. And then you can get your field guide out and start working. But it may seem a daunting task to start with, but really, most of the birds you'll see are very common. So you can get to know them very quickly, and that sorts out what the rare stuff is, or the more interesting stuff, because then they'll stick out like a sore thumb. The other thing is, you can tap into free expertise. It's out there. I'm one of those old sort of nerdy dudes that I love showing young people how to identify stuff, explaining how things work, all that side of it. That's not my personal insanity. That's something that I remember when I was infected by enthusiastic naturalists when I was a little boy. And they gave me a love for it that's led to a fascinating career going around the world looking at all sorts of interesting stuff. And so it's almost like those people want to pass on the mantle and encourage people to share their enthusiasm for a topic that they love. So, for example, if there's a local natural history society, sounds very dull, a natural history society, but it's not. It's old friendly people who are really trying to enthuse young people and share their expertise. And to go for a walk with some of these things, even to me, however long in the tooth I am, walking with experts is a humbling experience, because they may know more about not honeybees, but bees or dragonflies or bats. There's always tons to learn, or they may have a slightly different angle or a story on a bird that I know very well. So tap into that. It's socially, it's good fun. The people will take you to the best natural history areas around you, and they will share their knowledge freely in an entertaining and charming way. That is brilliant, brilliant tuition. In terms of the skills side of it, you probably want to look at getting some paperwork in place as well. It is possible to do it without, if you can develop your skills, because as I say, there is a bit of a shortage. But really, you want to be looking at a degree or an HND or something like that in a topic that's appropriate. So don't do something on the ethnobotany of mid-Peru or something like that. Make sure that it's something that's recognized by employers, something straightforward. To do that. I made some notes before because you primed me a little with the questions. They're slightly different to being a conservationist and running ecotourism. From the ecotourism side of it and conservation, I think a very important thing to do is to forget who you are. I had to consciously do this. Well, I've had to do it a few times in my career, but one time in particular, we were setting up the Marine Turtle Project in Sri Lanka, the national program. This is a hotspot for marine turtles globally, and it was really important we got it right. It was during a civil war, and we had to meet with government officials and go to Parliament and so on. And some of those government officials were deeply odious characters who'd been appointed for political reasons and because they were the best backstabbers and all of that lot. And you wouldn't share air with them normally. However, you had to go in and think to yourself, right, 4 of the world's marine species, marine turtles nest here in globally vital numbers. Right, it doesn't matter how much of an ass I think this person is that I'm speaking to. I'm going into this meeting because I need to get a result. That result is this strategy for marine turtles. So sometimes you've just got to sit and take it and always keep your eye on the goal. And the goal is conserving animals otherwise may go extinct. So you can't let your personal vanity get in the way. You're a tool of making something happen. So there's a slight difference there in those two areas. And tolerance, I mean, I think you've got to be able to cope with the setbacks. There will always be setbacks. So you go for what Jurgen Klopp at Liverpool says, don't get too high, don't get too low. And just again, keep looking at, keep focused on where you're going to. The other thing is, if you're working abroad on a conservation project or you're involved in ecotourism, choose your friends very carefully. Because sometimes, if you can imagine, for example, we work in the Gambia at the moment, for relatively poor people financially, a lot of people get involved in conservation projects because they see it as a way of making a living, and they will do anything to maintain that. It is their living, it's what pays for their children to go to school, and they may not have the interests of the animals totally at heart. In fact, that doesn't have to be the Gambia. If you look at what's happening with lynx in the UK at the moment, and there are other projects and so on, there are some questionable practices going on by individuals. You'll also get that in academia as well. So choose your friends well. Don't go in with this nice idea that everybody's really nice in the animal world. They're not. Take it from me. Just be your own judge and solicit people's opinions. Most people want their opinions to be heard. So if you ask them, well, listen, what do you think of what they're doing? It's worth doing it because people will probably tell you if there's a baddie in there, that sorts them out. So just be aware that, like any other walk of life, don't trust everybody at face value. Try and get some background on that. Okay, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that was an absolutely brilliant insight. Thank you very much, Roy. What What do you think is driving this? If I understood you correctly, you said that there is a tendency for people not to be ornithologists nowadays. What's driven the drop off in ornithological expertise?
Oh, wow. I think, how can I do this without being rude to the younger generation? I think people don't get out in the field as much, and everything's so immediate now, in your face, on your device, or on your 183 channels that you have available if you've got the whatever, that people want immediate rewards and they haven't got the patience. And often to find animals, and certainly to understand animals, you've got to watch them. And some of the time they're not very interesting. Some of the time they're sleeping in front of you and stuff. I think there's an immediacy to modern culture that kind of goes against that. And I think even within bird watching, when I was a teenager, the ultimate was to be invited to do the surveys of a local site as part of the national program. There's a thing called the Wetland Bird Survey. And I did that at some local gravel pits. And it was like, wow, look at me, I'm a proper bird watcher. Whereas in the past, when I've been working with airports and things like that, we said, well, let's ask about the local webs counts, see what the numbers are of these species in this area. And you phone the director and they say, oh, we can't get on to do the webs counts. It's like, what? There used to be queues for these things. People don't want to go and do the legwork. Even, again, within the birders, most birders seem to these days wait for their pager or their phone to go off to tell them where the rare bird is and then go and collect it on their list. Well, that was never bird watching to me. Bird watching to me was finding the new stuff. I also think that academically, I think a lot of people in academia aren't that skilled in fieldcraft. They do very well academically and filling in the paperwork and all that lot, so they get promoted and they do very well. But they're not necessarily the right people to guide you in developing if field skills are what you're about. So, for example, I said before about qualifications. If you do want to go to somewhere to study, say, zoology or ecological management or whatever, then have a look at who the team are. Look at the staff profiles. If they're a bunch of lab rats, they may be brilliant if you want to go into DNA and stuff, and they no doubt will be. But that might not be what needs to float your boat. So make sure you're in a place where, A, you can see wildlife. So I'm sorry, London, but there's no point being in the middle of London if you want to learn how to survey seabirds and things. Go to Aberdeen or something for that. But make sure you have the opportunities, and also you have the opportunities to join in with the local naturalists and the local enthusiasts, because they're the people who put the coal on your fires when it seems difficult and whatever, and they'll be able to guide you best.
That was fascinating. Thank you, Roy. Roy, how would you describe the consulting and ecotourism sectors today?
Yeah, they've certainly changed. I mean, in many ways, it's a reflection of the fact that the environment is now taken more seriously and that there is more legislation around it, which is, of course, to be welcomed. When I started our consultancy, 27 years ago, it was usually for the surveying jobs and so on. You would approach a local surveyor who was the recognized expert in that area. That's totally changed. Now, because of the growth of the industry, it's far more dominated by large companies who have a structure. So you're joining as a member of staff rather than being a solo flyer or so on. And the big difference is that with the growth, it's almost a move to make the profession more professional. So they're looking more for registration with trade bodies such as the Institute for Ecology and Environmental Management, and they're looking for quality control documents and things like that. This wasn't the way before. So there's a lot more paperwork. There are a lot of people who, with basic knowledge, are getting quite far, which is a functioning industry. There used to be, shall we say, wilder characters out there involved who you knew that they were maybe a fiery temper or some eccentricity to them, but they knew everything about what they were doing. These days, I'd say the world's become a little bit blander, but that's not to say that there isn't plenty of work out there for people who are willing to work hard and interesting opportunities. It is much larger, and particularly at the moment, there's a huge thing. Now, no matter what you think of HS2, obviously mixed views on that. There are lots of opportunities on HS2. Even if you don't want to work on HS2, HS2 is drawing a lot of people from the other companies, so there's vacuum left in other areas on non-HS2 projects and so on. So at the moment, there is a really big boost in the ecology sector. And you see people advertising for contractors and so on all of the time. And to get your minimum required to get on some of these contracts, you can actually go and do bat training courses that lead to you getting licensed, or great crested newt surveying that can lead to getting licensed and actually doing contract work, well, certainly by next summer in a year's time. So there are routes in, and it's very much a growth industry. Of course, assuming that there aren't any other HS2 size projects coming along afterwards, there will be a little bit of a lull after that. But that all depends on how the changes in legislation work out with Brexit and so on. So we'll see.
Very interesting. And Roy, how do you see the sector evolving over the next 20 years?
It's an unknown in many ways, because we simply don't know how seriously this government is going to take ecology and environment. I mean, they've talked a good talk, but historically they haven't walked a good walk. So everybody's on tenterhooks. We're just sitting there waiting to see when the actual announcements are made on whether or not we're retaining the things like the driving legislation, like the European Habitats Directive, which was the main thing that everybody used to work to. If that's weakened, which it looks like it's going to be, then you may be able to, many people who would have previously done surveys, you may be able to get your planning permission without those surveys being required and so on. So wildlife will be less protected, and those who study it less employable.
Just how big is HS2 for the biological consulting industry over the next foreseeable future, 4 or 5 years? I mean, is it really going to, once complete in 5 years' time, or whatever it happens to be, is it really going to lead to a significant impact on the sector?
Well, it's certainly driven growth. I'm not directly involved in any survey work or anything to do with it. Everything I'm getting is from what I've been told by other people who are involved, or by looking on the Facebook pages. There are many for things like freelance ecologists, there's British ecologists and things like that, where there are discussions about these things. And it's clear that there are a lot of companies who are growing rapidly looking for contractors because of the demand created by this one project. As somebody with an environmental interest, I would like to see large infrastructure projects in the future carrying on. So I'd hope that these opportunities continue to exist. But it all depends on the politics of the situation.
Roy, what advice can you offer someone wanting to do what you do, to be a biological consultant? You've worked on sea turtle projects overseas. You've got the project in the Gambia. What advice can you offer for somebody wanting to do either the biological consulting domestically here in the UK, or wanting to set up the research project that you've set up?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in the first instance, it may appear a bit of a problem, but try and get that paperwork if you can. I used to say to my zoology students, yes, it's a pain to have to do this module and you don't like it, but you're spending 3 years getting your passport to a life of doing stuff that you want to do. So just get past this task, get that piece of paperwork, because as the industry becomes more professional, that's becoming more important. That said, if you're not of the academic route, you can get involved directly in conservation. You can get involved with foreign work and so on, and actually lead good projects. Now, bear in mind when you're choosing a project to get involved in, sorry, I don't mean to sound negative, but I've been in the industry a long time. There are some lifestyle projects out there. There are people who will go and say that they're looking after wildlife. There was a turtle project in Greece that I was involved in. My proudest moment was I got it shut down because the guy in charge was a charlatan. And he was running this project as a way of supporting his yacht business and milking a UK charity and with student volunteers and so on. But it wasn't actually adding anything to the conservation and whatever. And this was a place that had an exclusive license, and nobody else could do the work. So by getting that project closed down, that allowed Greek biologists to come in and do it. So just be aware that when you're looking at projects abroad or getting involved, that sometimes it's people making money to support their lifestyle. You don't necessarily want to be going out and spending a lot of money going to somewhere living in the back of beyond where all you're doing is growing potatoes or something like that. So be aware. I've got to do a shameless plug, John. I can't help myself. But ours, Project Wild Gambia, you can Google it. It's all up there. Project Wild Gambia. That's all involved in the direct research, and that research actually gets published, and you get acknowledged as a student. So, but I'm not here to do that. I would say the single biggest thing, apart from studying, I've said about getting involved with local enthusiasts, use them because they will enjoy being used, and you will learn a lot. Specialize, so find employable groups if you can. You know, if you want to work on pandas, give it up. It's not going to happen. You know, find bats, great crested newts, natterjack toads, things that are financially viable. I think it's important to, one thing I've always found is pursue every opportunity. It may not seem like a good thing to go out and do this with these people, but if all you're going to do is watch EastEnders otherwise, go with them. The reason why I got invited by our local university to lecture and so on was because I was a voluntary director of our wildlife trust in Cumbria, which started from me delivering newsletters, if I remember right. It's funny how if you're good and you're enthusiastic, if you can get yourself in there, people will recognize that. People want to support you if you're a genuine person trying to make a difference and do good things. So get out there. It may not seem, like I say, that individual opportunity is going to lead you anywhere. It doesn't have to. Just get there, because you don't know what's going to actually happen, and you don't know who you're going to meet. Two of our very first two people who went to the Gambia ended up, while they were there, they met people and landed jobs. One was as a warden working for Scottish Natural Heritage. He's now the warden of St Kilda. And the other, Cassie got a post with the BBC Natural History Unit, only because they were actually sitting looking at some monkeys in West Africa. You know, you don't necessarily see the route, but get yourself out there and get involved in stuff. So use every opportunity.
That's fantastic. Roy, is there anything else that you'd like to add? I'm thinking, you know, your project that you mentioned in the Gambia, you're also in a very niche area in wildlife control and mitigation on airports. We haven't really covered that on the channel. Anything else you'd like to add, Roy?
Well, I mean, I think that's a fascinating example. The bird strike stuff. You know, we advise airports on how to manage areas of land around the airport so you don't get geese crossing the runways. We never encourage lethal control, just to say, but it's all about getting that balance in nature. It's using conservation thinking in reverse. So it's pest control by using the same population processes. But that came about because I was supervising a student who was working on biodiversity in ponds. And it was the University of Northumbria. So they got a request to do a bird strike thing for Newcastle Airport. And they said, well, we don't have any bird people. And they said, oh, what was that long-haired fellow who came in for coffee last week talking to Mike? Roy, give him a bell. Yeah. And I've ended up, you know, that's been my main earner within the consultancy for the last 20 years. But it came about from an unforeseen opportunity and link of events. The thing that I would say most importantly to anyone out there who's going to travel, or go to areas that are not that well studied, prime yourself and be vigilant. We need everybody out there using their eyes and ears to find stuff. So if you're going to a country where there is something that's poorly known, go on the red lists for the IUCN. That's the list of the world's rarest species, and make sure that if you're going for a walk in a forest, it may be to look for a baboon or to look for a crocodile or a dolphin here or whatever. But if there's anything there, it might be a sea slug or whatever. If there's anything really rare, prime yourself so you know what it looks like. The reason I say that is we don't have an army of surveyors big enough to survey every group. But if people can actually prime themselves, we were doing vulture surveys in the Gambia for a critically endangered species, the hooded vulture, and we were setting up a scheme. And I stopped, and these were in the naughty days when I used to smoke cigarettes. I had a fag break, stood there, and I looked down into a little pool, and there was a pair of lovely brown eyes staring up at me. And I got very excited. And I got one of our team, and I said, "Ryan, get down there, photograph that." "Why? What is it?" "Get down there." He got the photograph. And it turned out we'd rediscovered West African dwarf crocodiles in the Gambia. But that's only because I'd primed myself before I went with looking up. You know, technically it was extinct. So I was actually even looking at the extinct list, just in case we bump into, well, how do I tell it from a West African croc? West African croc has green eyes. This has brown. So I'd primed myself to know to look for the brown eyes. We've also found, well, we've actually found a new species that we haven't published yet, so I can't say that yet. But we also found the world's rarest species, Hypanus rudis. We didn't expect that. That's only from an expert, but we actually rediscovered a stingray that hadn't been seen since 1870, which was the only time it had ever been seen on the planet. And when they collected the type specimen, they put it in a museum and they lost it in 1970. So we're actually looking for a species at the moment that was technically extinct, and that there isn't even a type specimen of, but only because we were primed to know what to look for. But if we don't know what it is, you take images of it and you send it to the experts. Make sure that you are out there as the police force trying to look after the rarest species. Everybody has a role in that.
That was absolutely fantastic, absolutely fascinating. Dr. Roy Armstrong, Technical Director at Armtsrong McCaul Biological Consultants, thank you very much for being on the Practical Animal Channel.
An absolute pleasure. Good luck to everybody who wants to go into this profession. It's a very rewarding lifestyle. You may find that you won't be the richest person on the planet, and some people may have fancier cars, but that night when you're sitting on a beach and as a result of what you've done, marine turtles come back like they have done for 95 million years and crawl up the beach to lay their eggs on a site that you've contributed to now protecting, you'll feel like you're the richest person on the planet.